consumer perception, learning and information processing. Reality to an individual is that individual's perception, a personal phenomenon on the basis of which the individual acts or reacts, and not on the basis of objective reality. For this reason, marketers are particularly interested in consumers' perception than their knowledge of objective reality. Simply put, perception is how we see the world around us. Consumer also updates his learning behavior has two aspects: observable behavior as well as non-observable cognitive activity. This means that learning can also occur without any change in observable behavior, as may happen when a consumer's attitude changes as a result of a new learning. This lesson covers consumer perception, learning and information processing. It follows from the previous slide that after studying this lesson, you should be able to enumerate the elements of perception, analyze the dynamics of perception, analyze the use of perceptions, analyze the learning elements and theories, analyzing information processing, memory process. Although intimately related, sensation and perception play two complementary but different roles in how we interpret our world. Sensation refers to the process of sensing our environment through touch, taste, sight, sound, and smell. This information is sent to our brain in raw form where perception comes into play. Perception is the way we interpret these sensations and therefore make sense of everything around us. Attention occurs when the stimulus activates one or more sensory receptor nerves and the resulting sensations reach the brain for processing. In the context of consumer behavior, the consumer's selection of stimuli from the environment is based on the interaction of expectations and motives with the stimulus itself. Each of these factors can serve to increase or decrease the probability that the stimulus will be perceived. The principles of selective perception include following concepts: selective exposure, selective attention, perceptual defense, and perceptual blocking. Perceptual adaptation is the means by which the brain accounts for the differences that the subject may witness, particularly alternations in the visual field. Perceptual vigilance implies that we tend to notice things immediately important to us, while perceptual defense implies that we don't see what we don't want to see. Individuals in their own unique manner interpret the stimuli. As the old saying goes, a person sees what she expects to see. Interpretation of stimuli by individuals is based on their earlier experiences, plausible explanations they can assign their motives, beliefs, and interest at the time of perception. An image is a total perception of something that the individual form by processing all the information they are exposed to over time. Research indicates that consumers develop enduring perception or images about brands, prices, stores, and companies. These inferences are consumers' belief about the product or services. These may be used to a great extent by us. Consumers have certain expectations of what the price is or should be of a product or service. Their expectation may or may not reflect the actual price of the product or service. They often associate the price of the product or service with quality. This implies that they are willing to accept a range of prices called an acceptable price range. The higher end acceptable price is called reservation price. Below the lower end of the acceptable price, the consumer might be suspicious about the product's quality, and above the reservation price, the product would be considered too expensive. Consumers often tend to assess the quality of a product or services on the basis of different types of information they relate with the product or service. Intrinsic cues or stimuli that direct motives relate to the physical attributes of the product, such as the size, color, or smell, etc., which are sometimes used to judge the quality of the product. Consumers lacking actual experience with the product tend to judge the quality on the basis of extrinsic cues such as brand image, price, or even the country of origin, etc. Lacking previous purchase experiences may lead to an awareness that higher quality products tend to cost more, and high price may become an indicator of higher quality, and suspect the quality of low-priced products. Whenever consumers make decisions to purchase any new brands, there is an element of uncertainty about the consequences, and a perception of risk is involved in most such purchases. Risk perception can be defined as the consumer's perception of uncertainty that they may face when they are unable to foresee various consequences of their purchase decisions. The relevant risk dimensions are the uncertainty and the consequences. Though learning cannot be defined, Schweifman and Kanuk have defined learning from a marketing perspective as the process by which individuals acquire the purchase and consumption knowledge and experience that they apply to future-related behavior. The elements of learning include motivation, cues, response, and reinforcements. Behavioral learning theories are sometimes also referred to as connectionist or stimulus-response theories. Two important behavioral theories, classical conditioning and instrumental conditioning, are of great relevance to marketing. According to this theory, if a stimulus that results in an emotional response is repeated alongside another stimulus which does not cause an emotional response, eventually the second stimulus will result in the same emotional response. Classical conditioning is thus learning by association. Operant conditioning, sometimes referred to as instrumental conditioning, is a method of learning that occurs through rewards and punishments for behavior. Through operant conditioning, an association is made between a behavior and a consequence for that behavior. The cognitive behavioral learning or CBL model claims that the memory construct is comprised of schemata or packet of knowledge that integrate information about a particular generic concept, and that schemata are made of scripts that contain dynamic representations of the actions associated with a concept. The CBL model also recognizes external structural causes of behavior. The external or situational structures primarily provide the consumer with information which can be broken into two types of information cues: discriminative stimulus cues and reinforcing stimulus cues. Discriminative stimulus cues appear in reinforcement situations in which they announce the reinforcement opportunity, but they are not necessary for reinforcement to occur. Example of these cues would be model's action, but not the outcome. In an advertising and a company's logo, reinforcing stimulus cues include vicarious and experiential reinforcing cues. These are viewed in a cognitive sense, rather than a necessary condition for learning. Vicarious reinforcing are incurred when an individual observes the outcome another person's action. Experiential reinforcing stimulus cues are incurred when an individual directly experiences the outcome of his or her own action. Now let us take a quiz. It is in form of a practical example that we all witness one time or the other in our lives. It talks about a case in which a girl named Sabia goes to a grocery store with her mother. As they near the checkout lane, Sabia starts whining for a candy bar, but her mother says no. Sabia begins to cry and cries louder when her mother continues to refuse. At the checkout lane in front of the cashier, Sabia throws herself onto the floor and begins screaming. Her mother responds by grabbing a candy bar and giving it to her. She quickly quiets down and eats her candy bar. This exchange gets repeated on subsequent trips to the grocery store. Now read the questions given on the screen and answer each of them one by one with adequate reasoning. Memory processes are extremely important to the understanding of consumers. Cognitive theorists are particularly concerned in learning how the information gets stored in memory, how it is retained, and how consumers retrieve the stored information during brand evaluation. At any given point in time, only a portion of that memory can be activated for use, and the remaining inactive portion of memory are not available to recall information stored in memory. A general belief is that there are three separate storehouses for sensory memories: short-term memory and long-term memory. However, each of these should not be taken as separate physical entity, but as distinct process of memory functioning having separate characteristics. The information is retained temporarily in the first two stores before finally being stored in the long-term memory. Memory processing of information requires that first of all it should be filtered through short-term memory, then stored in long-term memory, and finally retrieved when needed. Information available for storage in long-term memory depends on the amount of rehearsal it gets by an individual. In case there is no rehearsal for an input, it would lead to fading and ultimately the loss of material. Now let us check if we have understood the various concepts discussed in this lesson clearly. Intrinsic stimuli include activities to influence consumer behavior, right or wrong?
Wrong.
The next sentence says, reference price determines the basis of comparison of prices, right or wrong?
Right.
Halo effect refers to accessing information from long-term memory and activating it, right or wrong?
Wrong.
Before we end, let us briefly revise what we've studied till so far. Perception consists of those activities by which an individual acquires and assigns meaning to stimuli. Reality to an individual is that individual's perception. Different individuals may be exposed to the same stimuli under the same conditions, but how each individual recognizes the stimuli, selects them, organizes them, and interprets them is unique in case of each person and depends on each individual's needs, wants, values, beliefs, personal experiences, moods, and expectations. Attention occurs when the stimulus activates one or more of the sensory receptors and the resulting sensations reach the brain for processing. Individuals selectively attend to only those stimuli that physically attracts them or personally interest them. Stimulus factors are physical characteristics of the stimulus itself, such as contrast, size, intensity, color, movement, and position, etc. Individual factors refer to individuals' characteristics such as expectations, motives, and learning, etc. Marketers are particularly interested in how consumers differentiate between brands, how they interpret images, what type of risks they perceive, and how they deal with the risk. Consumer behavior, in particular with the brand and company, also varies a lot with kind of business practices they do. Consumers tend to develop favorable perception regarding those companies which are fair and ethical in their activities. Learning can be viewed as a relatively permanent change in behavior occurring as a result of experience. Behavior has two aspects, observable behavior as well as non-observable cognitive activity. This means learning can also occur without any change in observable behavior. It is a continuous process and gets modified or changes as a result of exposure to new information and personal experiences. Four components appear to be fundamental to almost all learning situations and include motivation, cues, response, and reinforcements. Consumers must learn almost everything related to being a consumer, product existence, performance, availability, and preferences, etc. Memory is a result of learning and represents the information that an individual retains and stores, which can be recalled for future use. Most commonly, the information goes directly to short-term memory for problem solving or elaboration where two basic processes occur: elaborative activities and maintenance rehearsals. Elaborative activities involve the use of stored values, experiences, attitudes, and feelings to interpret and evaluate information in long-term memory. Maintenance rehearsal is the continual repetition of a piece of information in order to hold it into long-term memory. Long-term memory can be viewed as a relatively permanent place of storage for information that has undergone elaborative rehearsals. An almost unlimited amount of information can be retained in the long-term memory for several years or for just a few minutes. This information is constantly organized and updated as new links between chunks of information are formed.